The thing that finally broke my marriage wasn't the laughter. It was realizing every person laughing worked for me. My name is Ethan Walker, and for 15 years I sat through company galas, executive dinners, award ceremonies, and holiday parties watching my wife slowly turn me into a joke. Looking back, I should have seen it sooner. Maybe the signs were always there. Maybe success changes people in ways that happen so gradually you don't notice until one day you're sitting across from someone you no longer recognize. The ballroom shimmered beneath crystal chandeliers large enough to light an entire city block. Waiters moved between tables carrying trays of champagne, while a jazz quartet played softly near the stage. It was the annual Sterling Global Leadership Gala, the most important corporate event of the year. Every major executive was there. Board members, division presidents, investors, people whose decisions moved hundreds of millions of dollars. Olivia loved nights like this. She belonged in rooms like these. At least she thought she did. Standing near the center of the ballroom in a midnight blue designer gown, she looked confident, polished, untouchable. People gravitated toward her naturally. She was a senior vice president now, one of the company's fastest-rising executives. Everyone wanted a conversation. Everyone wanted her attention. Meanwhile, I stood alone near the back of the room with a glass of bourbon, watching. That had become my role over the years. The husband, the plus one, the man nobody bothered to ask questions about. It wasn't always like that, but tonight felt different. There was something sharper in the air, something final. I noticed it the moment Olivia glanced toward me from across the ballroom. There was embarrassment in her eyes. Not affection, not partnership. Embarrassment. The kind of look people give an old piece of furniture they've outgrown but haven't thrown away yet. An hour later, the speeches began. Awards were handed out. Executives congratulated one another. Cameras flashed. Applause echoed across the ballroom. Then Olivia won Leadership Excellence Executive of the Year. The room erupted. She smiled brilliantly as she walked onto the stage. Nobody could deny she had worked hard for it. Nobody could deny she was talented. I applauded with everyone else. For a moment, I felt proud of her. Then she stepped to the microphone. At first, the speech sounded normal. Thanking mentors, thanking colleagues, thanking the company. Then she smiled and glanced directly at me. The room followed her gaze. And of course, she said with a laugh, I should probably thank my husband Ethan. A few polite chuckles drifted through the audience. Olivia paused for effect. After all, somebody had to stay home and make sure the television remote didn't get lonely while I was building a career. The ballroom exploded with laughter. I heard glasses clink. Heard people repeating the joke to one another. Olivia laughed too. Loudly, proudly, like she'd delivered the line she'd been waiting years to tell. I felt every eye in the room shift toward me. Some amused, some uncomfortable, most simply curious to see how I'd react. I didn't react. I took a slow sip of bourbon and kept my expression calm. Years teach you certain things. One of them is that dignity doesn't come from winning arguments. It comes from knowing who you are when everyone else gets it wrong. Olivia wasn't finished. She shook her head dramatically. Honestly, if Ethan had even half my ambition, we'd be unstoppable. More laughter. Louder this time. And as I looked around that room, something settled inside me. Not anger. Not humiliation. Clarity. Because what Olivia didn't know was that every executive laughing at her joke, every vice president smiling into their champagne glass, every board member sitting at those tables, answered to someone. And that someone was me. The strange thing about being underestimated is that after a while people stop seeing you altogether. They stop asking questions. They stop looking closer. They build a version of you inside their heads and then spend years talking to that version instead of the real person. By the time the gala ended, most people had already forgotten Olivia's joke. They were back to discussing quarterly numbers, promotions, acquisitions, and market forecasts. But I remembered every word. Not because it hurt, because it confirmed something I had been noticing for years. Olivia no longer saw me. The drive home was quiet. Downtown lights reflected across the windshield as the city slipped past us. Olivia scrolled through congratulatory messages on her phone, smiling every few seconds as another executive texted her. The award sat carefully wrapped in tissue paper on the back seat. Finally, she glanced toward me. "You have been awfully quiet tonight," she said. I kept my eyes on the road. "You seem to be enjoying yourself enough for both of us." She laughed softly. "Come on. It was just a joke." That phrase, just a joke. Amazing how often people hide behind those 3 words after revealing exactly what they think. I nodded and let the conversation die. 20 years earlier things had been different. Olivia was not the woman sitting beside me now. Back then she was ambitious but kind. Confident without being arrogant. We met when she was 23 and working her first corporate job. She used to stay up late talking about her dreams. Not titles. Not corner offices. Not prestige. She talked about building something meaningful. About creating opportunities. About making a difference. Those were the things that attracted me to her. Success came later. Then more success after that. Promotions. Bonuses. Recognition. New responsibilities. New circles of friends. New priorities. The transformation happened slowly enough that neither of us noticed it at first. The first signs were small. She stopped introducing me as her husband and started introducing me as Ethan. Then she stopped talking about our plans and started talking about her plans. Eventually, every conversation became centered around career rankings, executive politics, and who was moving up or down the corporate ladder. Somewhere along the way, she began measuring people by titles. That was the mistake. Because titles are often the least interesting thing about a person. The next morning, I woke before sunrise as usual. The house was silent. Coffee brewed in the kitchen while pale morning light spilled across the marble countertops. Olivia was still asleep upstairs. I carried my mug onto the back patio and sat alone watching the first rays of sunlight touch the trees beyond our property line. Moments like that always reminded me why I chose the life I did. Quiet has value. Privacy has value. Freedom has value. Most people spend their lives chasing recognition. I spent mine avoiding it. A few hours later, my phone vibrated once. Then again. Then 5 more times. Messages. Emails. Notifications. The board had seen the gala recording. Several executives wanted to speak with me immediately. One message came from Richard Bennett himself. The same Richard who laughed the night before. His email contained only 7 words. "We need to talk as soon as possible." I stared at Richard's message for several seconds before setting the phone face down on the patio table. Most people would have assumed his concern was about the gala. It was not. Men like Richard Bennett did not lose sleep over awkward speeches or executive gossip. They worried about consequences. They worried about decisions. They worried about who held authority when the room stopped applauding and real business began. The morning air carried the scent of freshly cut grass from somewhere down the street. A sprinkler clicked rhythmically across a neighboring lawn. Everything felt calm. Ordinary. Yet beneath that calm, something had already shifted. For years I had allowed people to create their own stories about me. Some assumed I inherited money. Others assumed I retired early. A few believed I had failed professionally and survived on Olivia's success. The truth was much simpler. I stopped explaining myself a long time ago. Around 8 o'clock, Olivia finally came downstairs. She looked energized despite the late night. Her award sat on the kitchen island where she had proudly displayed it before going to bed. She poured herself coffee and smiled as she checked her phone. More congratulations. More praise. More reminders that she was becoming one of the most visible executives in the company. "You should have seen the comments online," she said. "The speech is getting a lot of attention." I looked up from my mug. "I am sure it is." She studied me for a moment. "You are still thinking about that joke." "Not really." That answer surprised her because it was true. I was not thinking about the joke anymore. I was thinking about patterns. About 15 years of small moments that all pointed in the same direction. She mistook my silence for surrender. Most people did. Around 9:30 another email arrived. Then another. Then 3 more. Board members. senior executives, legal counsel. Every message carried the same underlying tone. Respect, caution, urgency. Olivia noticed the constant vibration from my phone. "You seem popular today," she said with a laugh. "Work never stops." Again, technically true. She nodded without giving it another thought. That was the irony. The answers had always been sitting right in front of her. She simply never looked closely enough to ask the right questions. 20 years earlier, when Sterling Global existed only as a rough business plan spread across my dining room table, I spent countless nights building it from nothing. No investors, no shortcuts, no headlines, just long hours, calculated risks, and a belief that the company could become something extraordinary. Eventually it did. As it grew, I stepped further into the background. Public attention never interested me. I preferred building systems that lasted longer than personalities. The company evolved. Leadership changed. New executives arrived. New divisions opened across the country. Through it all, I remained exactly where I wanted to be. Invisible. That afternoon Richard called directly. His voice sounded different than usual. More careful. More formal. "Ethan," he said, "there are some matters we need to discuss." I looked through the kitchen window toward Olivia. She was smiling at her award while responding to messages from colleagues. "I know," I said quietly. "I think it is time." That evening I found myself thinking less about the company and more about Olivia. Success rarely changes a person overnight. It happens in layers. One promotion, one achievement, one compliment at a time. Like water shaping stone, the changes are almost invisible until years have passed and the landscape looks completely different. I remembered our first apartment, 800 square feet above a bakery in Columbus. The floors creaked when you walked across them. The air conditioner barely worked during July. We shared a second-hand couch and a dining table that leaned slightly to one side. Back then, neither of us cared. We were building a future together. Every Friday night, we would sit on the balcony with takeout containers balanced on our laps and talk about where life might take us. Olivia dreamed big. I admired that about her. She wanted responsibility, influence, opportunity. I wanted those things for her too. What she never knew was that many of the opportunities that appeared throughout her career had crossed my desk long before they reached hers. Not because I manipulated outcomes. Quite the opposite. I worked harder than anyone to ensure she earned everything on merit alone. Whenever her name appeared during succession planning discussions, I removed myself completely. No recommendations, no interference, no favors. I wanted her success to belong entirely to her. The irony was that the higher she climbed, the further apart we seemed to become. Titles became important. Recognition became important. Perception became important. Somewhere along the way she stopped valuing quiet strength because quiet strength does not attract applause. The next morning she left early for headquarters. I watched her pull out of the driveway before finishing my coffee. A few minutes later another call came. This time from Margaret Ellis, the chair of the governance committee. Margaret had known me for nearly 2 decades. Her voice carried the calm confidence of someone accustomed to making difficult decisions. "The board wants guidance," she said. Everyone saw the recording. I looked through the window at the empty driveway. "And what exactly are they expecting?" A brief silence followed. "They want to know whether you intend to remain invisible." That question lingered long after the call ended. Remain invisible. For years that had been the easiest choice. Let executives take credit. Let the media focus elsewhere. Let the organization function without personality cults or celebrity leadership. The system worked because it was never about me. Yet now I found myself wondering whether invisibility had created its own problem. When people do not know who built the foundation beneath them, they eventually start believing the foundation appeared on its own. Around noon, an encrypted report arrived from legal counsel. Attached was a schedule for a special board session requested by multiple directors. Attendance mandatory. Executive leadership required. The meeting was set for Monday morning. Less than 72 hours away. I stared at the date for several seconds. Then I closed the file and leaned back in my chair. Outside, sunlight reflected across the lake behind our property. Everything looked peaceful. But beneath that calm surface, currents were already moving. And for the first time in 15 years, I was seriously considering stepping back into the light. Monday arrived beneath a gray Ohio sky, the kind of morning that feels ordinary until you realize it is not. I woke before dawn and sat alone in the kitchen while the coffee maker hummed softly in the background. The special board meeting was scheduled for 9 o'clock. Every member of executive leadership had already confirmed attendance. Nobody knew exactly why. Officially, the agenda referenced governance review and strategic oversight. Unofficially, the rumors had already started spreading through headquarters. Olivia noticed my suit as she entered the kitchen. "You look dressed up for a Monday," she said. I adjusted my cufflinks and smiled faintly. "I have a meeting." She laughed. "Everybody has meetings." Then she grabbed her keys and headed for the door. Neither of us realized how different our mornings were about to become. Headquarters occupied 38 floors of glass and steel overlooking the river. By 8:15, executives were already gathering in conference rooms, reviewing reports and preparing presentations. Olivia walked through the lobby carrying herself with the confidence of someone who expected another successful week. People congratulated her on the award. Several stopped to praise her speech from the gala. She accepted every compliment with practiced ease. What she did not notice was the unusual tension in the building. Conversations seemed shorter. Smiles seemed tighter. Groups of executives gathered in corners speaking quietly before falling silent whenever someone approached. Around 8:30, Richard Bennett stepped off a private elevator. Usually he moved through the building greeting people by name. Today he barely acknowledged anyone. His expression remained focused as he headed directly toward the executive conference floor. Olivia caught up with him near the elevators. "Richard," she called. "Any idea what this emergency meeting is about?" For a moment he looked almost uncomfortable. "No comment," he said carefully. Then he continued walking. Olivia stood there watching him disappear down the hallway. That answer bothered her more than she wanted to admit. At 8:45, every executive received the same message. Attendance mandatory. No exceptions. Conference Room A, the largest boardroom in the building. By 8:55, the room was nearly full. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked the city skyline. A polished walnut table stretched nearly 40 feet through the center of the room. Senior leadership occupied their usual seats. Directors filled the remaining chairs. Olivia sat near the front beside Richard. The atmosphere felt strange. Anticipation mixed with uncertainty. Nobody seemed to know why they had been called together. Then another detail began drawing attention. The chair at the head of the table remained empty. Not unusual by itself. Except that chair belonged to a position nobody had seen occupied in more than 15 years. Several executives exchanged confused looks. Others checked their phones. At exactly 9 o'clock, the doors opened. The room fell silent. Every conversation stopped. Every head turned. And for the first time in a very long time, I walked into a room where nobody could pretend not to see me. The silence lasted only a few seconds, but it felt much longer. I walked toward the head of the table at an unhurried pace while dozens of eyes followed me across the room. Confusion spread first, then recognition, then something else. Understanding. One by one, people began rising from their seats. Not because anyone instructed them to. Not because a protocol required it. They stood because they suddenly remembered exactly who occupied that chair. Olivia remained seated at first. Her expression shifted from curiosity to disbelief as more executives rose around her. Richard Bennett stood. Margaret Ellis stood. Every board member stood. The entire leadership team followed. The only sound in the room came from the faint hum of the city beyond the glass windows. I reached the end of the table and placed a folder on the polished surface before taking my seat. Only then did everyone else sit down. Olivia looked from face to face, searching for an explanation. Nobody offered one. Richard cleared his throat. For the first time since I had known him, he seemed genuinely nervous. "Thank you all for attending on short notice," he began. His eyes briefly met mine before returning to the room. "There have been questions regarding governance, oversight, and long-term leadership structure. Today, we will be addressing those questions directly." Several executives exchanged uncertain glances. Olivia leaned slightly forward. I could almost see her mind trying to assemble pieces that refused to fit together. Richard opened a document packet and continued. "Many of our newer executives joined the company after the restructuring 15 years ago. As a result, some may not be fully aware of the organization's original ownership framework." The large screen behind him illuminated. Corporate records appeared. Historical documents. Formation agreements. Board resolutions. Names. Dates. Signatures. Olivia's eyes narrowed as she read the first page. Then the second. Then the third. The color slowly drained from her face. Richard continued speaking, but his words seemed distant compared to what the documents were revealing. Sterling Global had not been created by a committee. It had not emerged from a merger. It had not appeared through institutional investment. It started with one founder, one vision, one controlling trust that remained active to this day. My name appeared on every page. Founder, majority beneficiary, permanent chair, final authority. The room remained silent. Nobody laughed. Nobody checked a phone. Nobody looked away. Olivia stared at the screen as though it belonged to another reality. Finally, she turned toward me. The confidence that had always seemed so effortless was gone. In its place was something I had not seen in years. Uncertainty. "Ethan," she said quietly, "what is this?" I folded my hands together and met her eyes. "The truth," I answered, not angry, not triumphant, just calm, because the truth rarely needs volume. It only needs time, and after 15 years, time had finally arrived. The room remained frozen long after I spoke. It was remarkable how quickly certainty could disappear. A few minutes earlier, everyone in that boardroom believed they understood the hierarchy of the company. They believed they knew who held influence, who controlled outcomes, who mattered. Now those assumptions were collapsing one by one. Olivia looked back at the screen, searching for a mistake that was not there. The legal documents continued scrolling across the display. Original incorporation papers, trust agreements, board authorizations. Every record pointed to the same conclusion. Nothing had changed except her awareness of it. Margaret Ellis finally broke the silence. "For 15 years, Ethan has intentionally remained outside public operations while maintaining governance authority through the trust structure approved by this board." Her voice was calm and professional. Every major strategic decision ultimately required his authorization. A murmur spread around the room. Some executives looked shocked. Others looked relieved. A few appeared embarrassed. Richard adjusted his glasses and exhaled slowly. "Many of us have worked directly with Ethan for years," he said, "even when you did not realize it." That statement landed harder than any presentation slide. Olivia turned toward him immediately. "You knew?" she asked. Richard hesitated. Everyone at this table knew. The words seemed to drain the remaining color from her face. I watched the realization settle over her. The executives she spent years impressing. The leaders whose approval she chased. The board members she carefully cultivated relationships with. All of them had known a truth she never bothered to discover herself. The irony was almost painful. Olivia had spent years trying to climb closer to power without realizing she came home to it every night. No one spoke for several moments. Outside the windows, traffic moved through the city below. Tiny cars followed invisible patterns. Life continued as normal while an entire worldview unraveled inside that room. Finally, Olivia looked directly at me. "Why did you never tell me?" Her voice was softer than I had heard in years. There was no arrogance left in it. No performance. Just a question. A real one. I considered the answer carefully. "Because you never asked." The room grew quiet again. I was not trying to be cruel. It was simply true. During our early years together, she asked about everything. My ideas, my goals, my thoughts, my fears. We could talk for hours about subjects that had nothing to do with money or status. Somewhere along the way, those conversations disappeared. Questions became assumptions. Curiosity became judgment. She stopped trying to understand me because she believed she already had. I stood and gathered the documents from the table. This meeting was not called to embarrass anyone, I said. The company is performing well. Leadership remains strong. Governance remains unchanged. The purpose of today was clarity. Every eye followed me. The truth has a way of surfacing eventually. Sometimes the only choice we have is whether we meet it willingly. No one argued. No one challenged the statement. Because deep down, everyone in that room understood it. Including Olivia. Especially Olivia. The meeting ended, but nobody rushed for the door. Executives who normally measured their days in 5-minute increments remained seated as though standing up might somehow change what they had just witnessed. Reality has a strange weight when it finally lands. Settles slowly, quietly, then all at once. I gathered my papers and exchanged a few final words with the board before stepping away from the table. Around me, conversations started in cautious whispers. Questions, speculation, reassessment. Careers are often built on understanding people. That morning, many talented leaders realized they had misunderstood one person more than anyone else. Olivia remained seated. The conference room that usually made her feel powerful now seemed unfamiliar. Larger somehow. Colder. She watched as directors approached me one by one. Some thanked me for attending. Others asked for guidance on upcoming initiatives. A few simply shook my hand and wished me a good morning. None of it was dramatic. None of it was performative. That was the part that seemed to affect her most. Nobody was pretending. This was simply how the organization had always functioned. She had just never seen it. Eventually the room emptied. Sunlight reflected across the glass walls, casting long patterns over the polished table. Only a handful of people remained. Richard gathered his files and paused beside Olivia. "You earned every promotion," he told her sincerely. "Never doubt that." Then he walked away. I noticed her eyes follow him toward the door. For years she had sought validation from people like Richard. Yet, in that moment, his opinion seemed less important than a different question entirely. She stood slowly and approached me. For a few seconds, neither of us spoke. 20 years of memories occupied the silence between us. The tiny apartment above the bakery. Long walks after work. Shared dreams. Shared sacrifices. Shared victories. All of it felt strangely present. "How many people knew?" she finally asked. "The board. Legal counsel. Senior leadership." Her gaze lowered briefly. "And all this time," she never finished the sentence. She did not have to. I understood what she meant. All this time she had measured herself against people who already knew who I was. All this time she had been trying to impress executives. All this time she had mistaken privacy for insignificance. We walked together toward the elevators. The headquarters building moved around us like it always had. Employees hurried through hallways carrying laptops and coffee cups. Meetings started. Phones rang. Business continued. Yet something fundamental had changed. Not in the company. In us. As we entered the elevator, a young manager stepped aside and held the door open. "Good morning, Mr. Walker," he said respectfully. I smiled and thanked him. The doors closed. Olivia stared at the floor indicator as numbers descended one by one. 38, 37, 36. Finally she spoke. Her voice was barely above a whisper. "I do not think I ever really knew you." I looked at my reflection in the stainless steel doors. Then I looked at hers beside it. "The harder truth," I said quietly, "is that at some point you stopped trying to." The drive home felt different from any drive we had taken in years. Not because the roads had changed or because the city looked unfamiliar. The difference was silence. Real silence. Not the comfortable kind that exists between two people who understand each other. The kind that appears when old assumptions collapse and neither person knows what comes next. Rain began tapping softly against the windshield as we crossed the bridge toward home. Gray clouds hung low over the river. Traffic moved steadily around us. Nobody else on that highway knew a marriage was being measured in quiet moments and unfinished thoughts. Olivia stared out the passenger window for most of the drive. Several times she looked as though she wanted to speak. Several times she changed her mind. When we finally pulled into the driveway, she remained seated even after the engine stopped. The house stood exactly as it had that morning. Stone exterior, white trim, carefully maintained landscaping. The life we built together was still there. Yet both of us understood that something important had shifted. We entered through the front door and set our things down. The familiar scent of coffee from the automatic brewer lingered in the kitchen. Afternoon sunlight filtered through the windows. Ordinary details. Ordinary surroundings. Sometimes life-changing moments happen in places that look completely ordinary. Olivia stood beside the kitchen island and looked at me. There was no audience now. No executives. No board members. No titles. Just two people facing the truth. "I am sorry," she said quietly. The words seemed difficult for her. Not because she lacked sincerity. Because she understood how much they needed to carry. I nodded but did not immediately respond. An apology matters. Accountability matters more. She lowered her eyes. "I spent years chasing respect from people who already respected you. And somehow I never stopped to ask why." Her voice cracked slightly before she regained control. "I thought I understood success." I looked through the window toward the lake beyond our backyard. The water reflected streaks of silver beneath the clouds. "Most people do," I said. "They confuse visibility with value." She sat down slowly at the kitchen table. The same table where we had once spent hours discussing dreams and plans. "Were you ever going to tell me?" she asked. I considered the question. "Eventually. But I hoped you would become curious before that day arrived." Another silence settled between us. This one felt different. Less defensive. More honest. Finally Olivia looked up. "Can you forgive me?" I thought about the gala. The jokes. The assumptions. The years of distance. Then I thought about the young woman from that tiny apartment above the bakery. The woman who once cared more about people than titles. "Forgiveness is not the difficult part," I said. "The difficult part is rebuilding trust after people stop seeing each other clearly." She nodded slowly. Tears never came. Neither of us needed them. The truth was powerful enough on its own. Outside, the rain continued falling across the lake. Inside, for the first time in years, there were no roles to play. No status to defend. No image to maintain. Just a simple lesson that had taken 2 decades to fully understand. Power can earn attention. Success can earn admiration. But neither can replace respect. And the most valuable person in a room is often the one nobody bothered to understand until it was almost too late.